Right now, while you're sitting here, someone just made money from you and they didn't sell you anything, didn't ask your permission, didn't even know your name. Every country in the world owes money. America owes $38 trillion. Japan owes $9 trillion. And if you add up all the countries together, the total is $315 trillion, which is 3 times bigger than everything the whole world makes in 1 year. Now think about this for a second. If everyone owes money, then who are they paying? Where is all this money going? And when you start looking for the answer, you find something really strange. The world doesn't owe money to some other planet or some secret group hiding in caves. It owes money to itself. Like, imagine you borrowed money from your own pocket, and now you have to pay yourself back with interest. Forever sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly how it works. And this wasn't a mistake or accident. 4 regular men across 300 years built this system, piece by piece. And once you see how they did it, you'll understand why no government can ever escape. A long time ago, before the year 1694, when kings needed money for wars, they would go to rich people and say, "Give me gold. I'll pay you back later with some extra money as interest." And if the king couldn't pay, he would just say, "Sorry, I can't pay." And the rich person would lose their money. It was risky but simple. The debt either got paid or it didn't, and then everyone moved on with their lives. Then a man from Scotland named William Paterson showed up. He had tried to get rich many times and failed every time. But in 1691, he came up with an idea that changed everything. England was fighting a war with France. The king desperately needed money. The government was completely broke. Normal tax money wasn't enough to pay for the war. And all the rich people refused to lend more money because England had failed to pay them back before. So Paterson went to the king with a plan that sounded totally insane. He said, "I'll find some rich merchants to give you £1.2 million, which is like $300 million today. A huge amount of money, but here's the weird part. The loan will never be paid back, not in 10 years, not in 50 years, never. Instead, the government will pay interest on that money, forever 8% every single year. And to make this work, we'll create a new bank called the Bank of England." Here's how it worked. The rich merchants gave their gold to this new bank. The bank gave that gold to the government. The government used tax money every year to pay interest. And the bank gave that interest money to the merchants, but the main amount, the original loan, would just sit there. Forever, nobody would ever pay it back. It would be permanent debt. Now you might be thinking, why would anyone agree to this? Well, because the government promised that as long as England existed and could collect taxes from people, the interest would keep coming. It was guaranteed by law. And the paper notes the merchants got from the bank could be used like real money, actually better than money, because these notes paid interest just for holding them, so the merchants were happy. In 1694, the Parliament said yes to this plan. The Bank of England started the merchants, gave their gold. The government got money for the war. And for the first time in human history, government debt became something that would never go away. It wasn't a problem to fix, it was designed to last forever. The government was paying 8% interest every year on £1.2 million. That's £96,000 every year going to the merchants. Forever. Think about that. It's like if you borrowed money to buy a house, but instead of paying off the house, you just paid rent forever. And the house never became yours, and the person you repaying could sell your rental contract to someone else, but you still have to keep paying. That's exactly what happened here. The debt could be sold and traded, but never finished. But here's the really clever part that Paterson invented. The Bank of England got permission to print paper money backed by this government debt, so they could create actual currency up to the amount of the loan. This means they made money out of thin air. Just because the government owed money, the government's promise to pay became real money that people used in shops. And the more the government borrowed, the more money could be printed. So the system became government borrows money, never pays back. The main amount pays interest forever, and the debt itself turns into money that everyone uses if you're the one getting the interest payments. This is brilliant if you're a regular person paying taxes to fund that interest. It's a trap you can never escape. Within 50 years, every big country in Europe copied this exact system. France did it, Netherlands did it, and by 1790, even the brand new United States of America did the same thing. A man named Alexander Hamilton, who helped create America's money system, looked at the Bank of England and said, "Let's do exactly that." So America built its system on permanent debt, interest paid by taxes, and bonds that people could buy and sell. Paterson died in 1719, and he wasn't even super rich when he died, even though he created this whole system. But the Bank of England still exists right now today. British government debt has never been paid off, not once. They just keep borrowing more and rolling it over and paying interest, but the debt itself never disappears. The trap was set in 1694, and every government since then walked right into it. By the early 1800s, a guy named Nathan Rothschild took this system and made it much bigger. His family had banks in 5 major cities across Europe, and they could move money between countries faster than anyone else. During the wars with Napoleon, Nathan came up with a new trick. Instead of lending money directly to governments, he would buy government bonds cheap and then sell them to other people for more money. So he created what we call a market where people buy and sell these government debts like trading cards. Governments got their money fast. Nathan made profit from the difference, and regular investors got something they could trade. But here's where it gets darker. In 1815, there was a huge battle called Waterloo where Napoleon was fighting Nathan. Rothschild found out that Napoleon lost the battle before anyone else in London knew, because he had his own private messengers who were faster than the government's messengers. And he used this secret information to trick the market. First, he started selling British bonds, which made everyone think Britain was losing the war. So prices crashed down, everyone panicked and started selling their bonds too. Then, when prices were super low, Nathan quietly bought huge amounts of bonds for almost nothing. And the next day, when news came that Britain actually won, the prices shot back up and he made millions. This wasn't just smart trading, it created a new rule: whoever controls the information and controls who can buy and sell the debt controls everything. And by 1820, if any government wanted to borrow money, they had no choice but to go through the Rothschild family, because the Rothschilds controlled all the rich investors and set all the terms. But the bigger change was that Rothschild made it so government debt could be bought and sold across different countries. Imagine a British government bond is owned by a French investor, who sells it to a German bank, who uses it to get a loan from an Austrian rich person. Now the ownership is so tangled and complicated that if one government says "I'm not paying," it doesn't just hurt one person, it crashes the whole international system. So governments became trapped not because they wanted to be responsible, but because if they stopped paying, the entire world's financial system could collapse. Nobody wanted that. By 1900, America was becoming really powerful, but still had a basic money system. Banks all worked separately. Money was connected to gold. There was no central place to manage debt. And then in 1907, there was a big financial panic. Stocks crashed, banks started failing, the whole economy froze, and one man named J.P. Morgan, who was super rich, personally organized a rescue. He gathered all the big bank owners in his private library, locked the doors, and forced them to use their own money to save the failing banks. It worked and the panic stopped, but Morgan was 70 years old and knew he couldn't do this again. So he and the other most powerful bankers in America decided to create a permanent solution. They needed something like a central bank, but Americans hated central banks because they had tried them before and people had shut them down. So the bankers decided to hide what they were really doing. In 1910, Morgan's friends, including a senator and people from the biggest banks, had a secret meeting on an island called Jekyll Island in Georgia. For 9 days they designed what would become the Federal Reserve. They kept it secret because they knew if regular people found out that bankers were designing the country's money system, there would be huge protests and anger. Their plan was really clever politics. They wouldn't call it a central bank, they'd call it the Federal Reserve System. It wouldn't be one big bank, it would be 12 smaller regional banks. It wouldn't be controlled by Wall Street rich guys. It would be watched over by a board that the president appointed, so it looked spread out and democratic and public. But the way they designed it made sure bankers still had control. The regional banks were privately owned by other banks. Those banks chose the people in charge, and the most important power, which was creating money and buying government debt, was given to the New York Federal Reserve, which was controlled by the biggest Wall Street banks, Morgan's banks. The Federal Reserve Act became law in December 1913, and most of the politicians who voted for it didn't really understand what they were voting for. And immediately the debt trap got much bigger. Now the government didn't just borrow from regular banks, it borrowed from the Federal Reserve, which could create brand new money just to buy government bonds, unlimited money for government debt. Think about what this means. Before the Federal Reserve, there was a limit to how much the government could borrow, because banks only had so much money to lend, but now the Federal Reserve could just create money out of nothing by buying government bonds. The government says, "I need money," and creates a bond. The Federal Reserve says, "Okay, here's brand new money we just created." The government spends that money, and the debt goes on the Federal Reserve's books, backed by nothing except the promise that taxpayers will pay interest on it forever. This is how you get infinite debt. The Federal Reserve makes sure there's always someone to buy government bonds, no matter how much the government wants to borrow. So the government never has to stop borrowing. It can just keep rolling over the debt forever, because the Federal Reserve will always buy it. And where does the interest money come from? From you, from your taxes, flowing to the banks that own the Federal Reserve. By the 1970s, this system was working all over the world. Every rich country borrowed money and kept rolling over their debts and paid interest, but poor developing countries were different. They borrowed money to build roads and power plants, and many of them couldn't keep up with the payments. The system was reaching a breaking point until a man named Paul Volcker made it permanent. Volcker was the chairman of the Federal Reserve from 79 to 87. And he had a big problem. Inflation was over 10%, which means prices were going up really fast. People in other countries were losing trust in American money. He needed to stop inflation, even if it meant causing a recession and hurting the economy. So in 1979, Volcker raised interest rates really high. The main interest rate went from 11% to 20%, the highest it had ever been in American history. This stopped inflation, but it created another huge problem. Developing countries like Mexico and Brazil and Argentina had borrowed billions of dollars during the 70s when interest rates were low. Now those loans were due and the interest rates had tripled. Mexico owed $80 billion. Brazil owed $60 billion. Argentina owed $40 billion and they couldn't pay. Just the interest alone was more than all the money they made from selling things to other countries. In August 1982, Mexico announced we can't make our payments. We're defaulting. This should have caused a complete global financial disaster because American banks had lent most of that money. If Mexico didn't pay, then Citibank and Bank of America and Chase would all lose massive amounts of money and some might go bankrupt. The whole banking system was in danger. Volcker could have just let it happen. Let the banks lose money, let the system reset itself. But he didn't. Instead, he organized the rescue through something called the International Monetary Fund. The IMF would lend Mexico and Brazil and Argentina and other countries just enough money to keep making interest payments to the American banks. These loans were called structural adjustment loans, and they came with really harsh requirements. Governments had to cut their spending, sell off government-owned companies to private buyers, open their markets so foreign companies could come in, make their currency worth less. Basically, they had to give up control of their own economy in exchange for getting money to keep paying interest. And here's the key thing. These IMF loans didn't reduce the debt, they just rolled it over, made it possible to manage, but kept it going forever. So Volcker's innovation was this: when debt becomes impossible to pay, you don't forgive it, you restructure it. You lend just enough to keep the interest payments flowing, and you force the country to give up control of their economy in exchange. The debt trap became a tool for control. Countries that couldn't pay were forced to open up their economies and sell their things, and follow foreign economic rules just for the privilege of staying in debt. And this same pattern has happened over and over for the last 40 years. Greece in 2010, Argentina in 2001, Sri Lanka in 2022. Every time it's the same thing: IMF loans to keep paying interest, harsh cuts to government spending, giving up control, and the debt never goes away. Just gets restructured and continues forever. So now you can see how these four men build a system where nobody can escape. Patterson made debt permanent, so governments borrow and pay interest forever and never pay back the original amount. Rothschild made it global and interconnected, so it's not just one lender but a huge complicated web where, if one country stops paying, the whole world system could crash. Morgan made it infinite by creating the Federal Reserve that can make unlimited money to buy government bonds, so governments can always borrow more. And Volcker made it inescapable by making sure that when countries cut and pay, they get restructured instead of forgiven, so the interest keeps flowing forever. And what we have now is $315 trillion in total debt across the whole world. Government debt and company debt, and regular people's debt like mortgages and credit cards. None of this will ever be paid back. All of it charges interest, and it's all connected through the financial system. So if there is a default anywhere, it threatens to crash everything everywhere. The US government has $38 trillion in debt. About $20 trillion of that is owned by American pension funds and mutual funds and insurance companies and banks and the Federal Reserve. These big institutions buy government bonds because they're supposed to be safe investments, but those bonds pay interest, about $1 trillion every single year. And where does that interest money come from? It comes from taxes, from you. So you pay taxes to the government. The government sends that money to the people who own the bonds. And most of those bond owners are big institutions controlled by wealthy people. So it's basically a transfer of money from working people to rich people every single year forever. The other $18 trillion is owed by the government to itself. To Social Security and Medicare, the government borrowed money from these programs and spent it. Now, it owes itself. But really that means taxpayers owe it, because when Social Security needs to cash in those bonds, The government has to either raise your taxes or borrow even more money to pay it. It's like a shell game moving money around, but the interest keeps flowing no matter what. Now make this bigger and look at the whole world. Japan owes 9 trillion mostly to Japanese banks and their central bank. Europe owes 14 trillion mostly to European banks and their central bank. China owes a huge amount to their government-owned banks. Every country is running the same system and they're all connected to each other. Japan holds American government bonds. America holds European bonds through the IMF. Europe holds debt from developing countries through the World Bank. It's circular. Everyone owes everyone, and the interest money flows up to the big institutions that manage all this debt. Here's why this can never end. If America paid off its $38 trillion in debt, the money supply would collapse and disappear, because dollars are actually created when the government borrows. If the government paid off all the debt, those dollars would vanish. You get deflation where prices crash. Depression, economic disaster, so the government can never pay it off. It has to keep borrowing and keep rolling it over and keep paying interest forever. The same thing is true for the whole world. If every government paid off their debt, the global money supply would shrink by 2/3. There wouldn't be enough money for people to buy and sell things and do business. The whole system would freeze and stop working, so the debt can't be eliminated. It's built into the structure. It's necessary for the system to function. And who profits from all this? The big institutions that hold the debt, companies like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and Fidelity. These money management companies control tens of trillions of dollars. They buy government bonds using other people's money from pension funds and retirement accounts and insurance payments. And they collect the interest, about $1 trillion per year just from US debt alone, plus all the interest from Japan and Europe and everywhere else. That $1 trillion per year flows from taxpayers to bondholders. It's the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. It happens continuously every single year. And most people don't even see it because it's not called a tax, it's called debt service. But it's the same thing. Working people pay, big institutions collect, and the debt never gets smaller. These four men never met each other. They lived in completely different time periods, but each one solved a problem in a way that helped bankers make money. And each solution built on top of what the previous person did. Patterson in 1694, Rothschild in 1815, Morgan in 1913. Volcker in 1982. Together they built a system where governments borrow forever and pay interest forever. And the people who control the bonds and manage the debt and collect the interest are the ones who really benefit. Not governments, not regular taxpayers, the big financial institutions. And that $38 trillion isn't a crisis for them. It's their business model. Every dollar of debt is an asset on someone's balance sheet somewhere. It pays interest, it can be used as collateral to borrow even more money. And as long as people have confidence, as long as people believe the government will keep paying interest even if it never pays back the original amount, the system keeps working. The debt trap is complete. There's no way out without crashing the entire financial system. 4 men, 300 years, one system. And now everyone on Earth is caught inside it.